Welcome to Building Mobile Sites using ASP.NET MVC, Part 1. In this video, we're going to walk through building web applications that target desktops, tablets, and phones using Microsoft's MVC framework. There are many different opinions on how to approach building web applications that target multiple screens. Some say that you need a dedicated site for mobile that is separate from the desktop version. This is known as the M-dot strategy because usually you get redirected to the M subdomain when you're on a mobile device. One of the issues you run into with the M-dot strategy is you end up with two or more sites that need to be maintained and usually have duplicate content. Others prefer to use responsive web design, which has the goal of a single site that will adapt to many different screen sizes. Responsive design can be difficult to achieve and usually ends up with page bloat. Because of this, you end up with less visible content on the screen, but you're still sending the entire page to the device. Just because it isn't visible on the screen doesn't mean that it isn't there. And you have to be aware of mobile devices and their lower download speeds and potential data caps. What we're going to focus on in this video is combining these two strategies to get the best of both worlds. It's important to understand that there are some obvious differences when comparing desktop screens to mobile screens, but there are also some not so obvious differences when comparing desktop screens to tablet screens. When you design a typical desktop website, you tend to work with a multi-column layout, with a 3-column layout being the most common approach. These layouts usually utilize banner images and menu bars. But this design doesn't really work on smaller screens. When laying out a mobile website, using a single column layout is usually a better approach. Using just one column makes it easy to scale between differently sized devices and makes it simple to switch between portrait and landscape mode. When it comes to tablets, things get a little tricky. A tablet tends to favor the one-column approach common to phones, but then it will switch to a 2-column layout when rotated to landscape mode, and only occasionally will it use a 3-column layout. Each of the designs has a different approach, and it would be a mistake to assume that we could create one page that will work well in all three of these form factors. It's not just a layout that changes either. There are other considerations. For example, tapping versus hovering and clicking. Consider that on a desktop, people are used to clicking on small text links for navigation. While a mouse is very precise for doing just that, a finger is quite the opposite. On a mobile device, people are tapping with their fingers and thumbs, and a small text link doesn't really work when you're trying to do that. Your mobile-friendly design needs to incorporate larger buttons and icons whenever possible, and use the links that let you tap anywhere on the whole line to activate a choice, not just the actual word that contains the link. A final consideration is hovering. Developers tend to use flyouts or tooltips that only appear when the user is hovering over an object. Hovering is a concept that simply doesn't exist on a touch-based device, like phones and tablets. Good desktop design is not the same as good tablet design, and that's not the same as good phone design. The key is to try and optimize the design to match the device requesting the content, and at the same time, not have to maintain duplicate content in multiple sites and files. Creating a mobile project is very easy. We can simply open Visual Studio, select a new MVC4 web application, and then choose Mobile Application from the project template options. A new site gets created with jQuery and jQuery Mobile set up and ready to run, which, when we do, we see a site that's laid out in a single column that's ready to be viewed on a mobile device. But the problem is that this is a mobile-only site. There's no desktop version. If we were building a mobile-only site, this would be just fine. But the goal of this video is to build a mobile-friendly site, which means we need not only a small version, but a medium and a large one as well. This is what the responsive design strategy aims to solve. But in reality, it's an exercise in futility and will probably end up producing something that doesn't work well in any of the three. But that's okay, because we're going to go a different route and use the MVC framework, which makes this very easy to do. So let's start over. But this time, we'll start off with an Internet application template instead. The Internet application template is optimized for desktops, but that's fine. We can work with it to make it more mobile-friendly. When we run this site, it looks very similar on both the desktop version and the mobile version. Notice that the mobile view has used a bit of responsive design and reflowed itself a bit to make it look a little bit better in that format. Most websites viewed on mobile devices are shrunk down to fit the screen of the device. This one, however, doesn't. That's because in the layout, we have a meta tag defining the viewport settings. WebKit-based browsers used in a majority of mobile phones like iPhone and Android will respect the viewport meta tag and try to resize and reflow the content to fit the width of the current device. There are several other meta tags that we'll cover later in this video. Alright, as interesting as that might be, we're here to deliver content specific to the device that is making the request, so let's move on. First thing, we have to determine what type of device is making the request, and for that, we'll look at the user agent. As you may already know, every time a browser sends a request to a server, it sends along a user agent string with the request that informs the server what application is requesting the information. This is an example of a request made to Google. As you can see, the user agent has some useful information in it. We can use the information in the user agent to determine what device is being used. Before going any further, we need to get set up so that we can preview the site as if we were using a mobile device. Doing this manually with real devices can be tedious and hard, so we're going to install an emulator that mimics a particular device. To do this, we're going to use Chrome and one of the available extensions called Mobile Tester. Just open Chrome, and from the menu, click on Settings, then choose Extensions, and finally Get More Extensions. Type in Mobile Tester and select the extension called Mobile/Tablet Device Testing. After it installs, it'll add an icon to the upper right corner of Chrome. You can click on it at any time when viewing a web page and it will open a window with a new request for the current page you're on, but it will send along a user agent specific to the device that you selected. What we need to do now is to make our MVC application capable of determining which type of device is making the request and then grabbing the right views. Open up the global ASAX file and add a new method called Initialize Display Mode Providers. Inside, we'll create a new default display mode using the suffix of phone. Display modes are used to determine the appropriate views to use. To do this, each display mode has a predicate that's invoked to determine if the display mode should be used or not. We set this predicate on the context condition property of the display mode. And we'll do this using a generic func that takes in an HTTP context base and returns a boolean. For the func body, we'll use the getOverriddenUserAgent method and check to see if it's not null and if it contains the string iPhone. We'll do the same thing for tablet, but this time we'll check for iPad instead of iPhone. Next, we just need to add our default display modes to the display mode provider. We want to make sure we use insert instead of add when adding our display modes to the collection, and this is because we need to add them to the beginning of the collection. We do this by passing in 0 and 1 for the indexes on the insert. If we don't do this and we use add, the desktop mode would always be used because it's the first one in the collection of display modes. And then finally, we just need to make a call to our method from the application start method. Each time a request is received by the application, it's evaluated to determine how that request should be formatted when it's processed. In this case, if the conditions are matched for one of our custom modes, then the name of that mode is injected into the name of the file. So for example, if a request came in for home/index on a browser, the view engine would look for index.cshtml. But if the request came in from an iPhone, the view engine would look for index.phone.cshtml because the name of the display mode is injected into the file name of the view. Now, you might be thinking that there are better ways to determine the device other than manual checking, and you would be absolutely correct. There are plenty of libraries out there to do this. One of them is 51 Degrees, which can be had from NuGet. But I wanted to show you exactly what is going on and what needs to happen without throwing another library into the mix. For this video, we'll just assume iPhone, and we'll use the iPhone simulator. All we have to do now is create device-specific views, and we're done. You could run the site at this point, both from a browser and from a phone. The site will display the desktop version on both though. If no device-specific view is found, the view engine will look for the standard view name instead. So copy the index.cshtml and paste it twice. Rename one to include .phone and the other to include .tablet. Open the phone view and remove all of the content, and then add an H1 with the text, "This is a phone." Go ahead and do the same for the tablet view. Now we can run this and test it. Our first view is the desktop mode. So far, so good. Let's switch to an iPhone now. Perfect. We see our phone-specific view letting us know that we're using a phone to view the page. Now the iPad. Awesome, they both work. Now that the mechanics are taken care of, we can focus on the content. The first step in creating a different look and feel for each device is adding jQuery Mobile to our project. We can easily do this by installing the NuGet package. It won't do anything for us immediately, but we'll need it in order to go forward. If you remember when we ran the site as an iPhone, we saw the page that said this is a phone, but it still had the desktop layout. This is because we haven't updated our device-specific views to use device-specific layouts. But at this point, we don't have any device-specific layouts. To fix this, we can do the same thing we did with the index view and copy-paste 2 copies of the layout, and then rename them to include .phone and .tablet. Let's open up the phone layout and examine it. At the top, we have the styles.render and scripts.render helpers that are being utilized. These are part of MVC4's bundling feature. Just in case you're not familiar with this feature, let's go over it. In the past, optimization of websites included reducing the number of requests made to the server from the browser and also the size of those requests. Techniques such as minification were used to do various transformations on style sheets and scripts, like removing whitespace and variable renaming. The result was smaller files. You see this in libraries such as jQuery, where you're offered a regular version or the minified version, which is much smaller in size. Concatenation is the process of combining 2 or more style sheets or 2 or more script files so that you reduce the number of requests to the server. Instead of requesting 2 individual script files, you now only request 1. There's a lot of tooling for these processes, but they've mostly been manual. MVC4 attempts to alleviate this problem by providing you with a simple, built-in way of combining and minifying files through the use of a bundle. Through bundling, you can simply point to a directory and tell that page you want everything in that directory lumped together in one file, and MVC will do it for you automatically. However, because we're including libraries such as jQuery Mobile, this automated bundling system isn't going to work for us. We don't want mobile libraries to get loaded with our desktop views. So what we're going to do is create custom bundles and then reference the bundles from our device-specific layouts. Let's open up the global ASAX again and add a new method called initializeBundles. Inside, we'll create a new script bundle with a virtual path of bundles/mobile.js. Then, we'll include jQuery mobile files using a wildcard, and then all jQuery scripts also using a wildcard. Next, we'll create a new style bundle with a virtual path of bundles/mobile.css. We'll include the jQuery mobile structure, and the jQuery mobile theme style sheets. Next, we just need to add them to the bundle table. But there's a problem. Because we're referencing the minified versions of the style sheets, the end result won't be what we expect. The bundler has an ignore list that ignores any files containing .min in the file name. So for this demo, we'll clear out the ignore list. Now we can add the bundles to the collection. Finally, we'll add a call to the initializeBundle method. Let's switch back to the phone layout and make use of our new bundles by replacing what's already there with our new virtual paths. The last thing to do is to update the phone view to use the phone layout. Let's run this and see what it looks like. Well, it doesn't look that good. We're still using the HTML from the desktop view. So let's go back and update it to something a little more mobile friendly. I won't bore you by typing it all out, so I'll just fast forward a bit. This page has most of the same content sections as the standard layout, but is formatted quite differently. We have our outermost div container, which is going to represent our page. Inside that, we have a div for our page header that contains the page title. Next is a div for our content area, which we set up a navigation menu with home and about links. Then down here, we render out the body of the view. Pay special attention to the data tags on the page, header, and content divs. Those are special tags that give jQuery Mobile more information about how to deal with these sections. There are many data tags that you could use to customize a page, and we'll go over more of them in a bit. Now when we run this site as a phone, we get a much nicer looking layout, but without disturbing the desktop version. At this point, we're starting to look more like a mobile site, but we're still not quite there yet. If you notice, when we scroll this site, the header scrolls off the page and disappears. We can address this by adding a data position tag to the header. This will make the header stick to the top of the page when you scroll up or down. Now when we view the site and scroll, the header stays put. This is an example of how easy it is to work with jQuery Mobile and its built-in features. This brings us to our next task, making the visuals a bit nicer. Our menu is looking a little plain and dated. We can fix this by adding a few additional jQuery Mobile tags. On the unordered list, we'll add a data role and a data inset attribute. The data role will be list view, and we'll set the data inset to true. And one last touch is to add a list divider. We do this by adding a new list element and giving it the list divider data role. This adds a new list item but makes it stand out as a header. It's a good way to visually break up an unordered list, and you can add as many list dividers as you want. Let's run this and check out the changes. It's looking much better than it was. Setting list view as the data role will convert the list elements to a nice layout that spans the screen width and allows them to be clicked as if they were buttons, not just links. This means that the users will have more real estate to click it with their finger instead of trying to click on a text link. In other words, it makes them finger friendly. Setting data inset to true adds to the appearance and helps set it apart from the rest of the page content. The list items will not take up the entire screen width and will receive some rounded edges. You can play around with this setting to see its different effects. Looking at this page, that menu is kind of taking up a lot of space. Not only that, there's no back button. If viewing the site in a browser, the user could use the browser's back button, but this wouldn't be possible if our site was in full screen web app mode. We'll come back to the menu in a bit. Let's get the home and back buttons working. Since there will be times when you won't want one or either of these buttons to appear, we're going to make it configurable. In our phone layout, we'll define two variables to keep track of the options. We'll pull the settings in from the view bag. We'll make the default true for now, but you can make them false if you want. This way, each action or device-specific view can control if the buttons should show or not. Inside of the header element, we'll add the conditional statements for the back and home buttons. We'll use regular links, but we'll mark them up with jQuery Mobile specific attributes. By setting the data relationship attribute to back, we're telling jQuery Mobile to keep track of the current stack of pages. When the user clicks on the back button, it'll take them back to the previous page in the stack. The transition, direction, and icon tags decorate the button a bit more and tell it how to behave. Let's run this and see how it looks. Awesome. We have back and home buttons that stay fixed with the header. On the home page, we really don't need either of these buttons, so we can open up the index page for the phone and just turn them off. Now when we view the site, the buttons are gone on the home page, but they come back on the About page. At this point, since we have a home button at the top, we can go ahead and get rid of the home menu item since it's kind of redundant. But let's hold off on that. Instead, let's take a minute to go over the jQuery Mobile sections. jQuery Mobile uses a fairly simple structure for defining its page elements. By using data role tags on a div, they define these basic areas: page, header, content, footer, and navbar. There are other areas that are defined, but these are the basic ones that you'll use most often. The page section is the main section of the document that jQuery Mobile uses to wrap around all of the following sections. Typically, it will include a header, content, and footer section, but only the content section is actually required. The page element itself isn't actually required. However, if you don't supply one, the framework will supply one for you. So it's kind of best practice just to go ahead and define it anyway. That way you don't get any unintended side effects. The header section contains the information that should be shown in the header of the page. The optional data position attribute can make this element stick to the top when the user scrolls the page. Now space is limited, so the title would be cropped if it doesn't fit. We can put any HTML we want here, but best practice is to use an H1 for the title, or we can also replace this with an image to make it fancier. If you add a button to the header div, it will automatically move to the left side. If you add a second button, it will move to the right side automatically. You probably don't want more than 2 buttons, as any others will move to the second line and make the header bigger. If you do want more than 2, use a nav bar instead. The content section is where you'll put most of your content. For the most part, you'll just have the render body action here. The footer section is very similar to the header, except maybe a little more flexible. We can put more than 2 buttons here, and they'll be added in a line, one after the other, not left aligned and right aligned like in the header. By default, the footer isn't formatted much, so you may have to add some other tags to make it look a bit nicer. The navbar section is a great place to put your navigation items. If you think about normal desktop or Windows application design, we tend to use a lot of tab controls to group together related tab pages. This section provides you with a similar way of linking those pages together easily. Now that we've covered the sections, let's go back to our menu and turn it into a navbar. To do this, we'll change the nav element to a div and apply the data role attribute with a value of navbar. And then we'll give it the data theme of B. Next, we need to remove the unordered list attributes since we don't want a list view anymore. Then we'll go ahead and delete the list divider. To get our navbar to be at the top of the page and stick there, we need to move our menu code out of the content section and into the header section. Now we can run the site and see our changes. At the top, we have a nice looking navigation bar. If you want, you can move the menu code to the footer and have the navbar at the bottom instead of the top. If you want both, you can move the navbar bits into a partial view and use a partial helper method to render it out. Let's go over some of those meta tags we talked about earlier. The viewport meta tag we saw previously is fairly simple. It tells the web page to always try to use the width of the device that is requesting the page. If you go to a website that doesn't have this tag, and the site is formatted for, let's say, 1024 by 768, the mobile browser would scale it down and the site would be very tiny. By specifying device width as a value, the mobile browser will reformat to fit the device width without changing the scale. Now this really kind of only works if you have a site that's structured correctly, otherwise the content may get skewed. There are a few other attributes on the viewport tag that you can use if needed. User scalable determines whether you allow the user to pinch zoom. The initial scale sets the size of the page when it loads, and the maximum scale defines how much the user will be able to zoom in. Both initial and maximum scale attributes use a value from 0 to 10. Of course, you can also set the width and height of the content using the width and height attributes. The Apple Mobile Web App Capable and the Apple Touch Full Screen can be set to yes or no. These don't do much for normal browser viewing, but they come into play when a user sets a shortcut on their home page while using an Apple device. When set to yes, the website will run in full screen mode just like a native app would. The address bar and buttons will be hidden. The difference between the two is when using Apple Mobile Web App Capable, you can also use the Apple Mobile Web App Status Bar Style meta tag to change the color of the status bar. The shortcut icon and icon meta tags allow you to assign an icon to your site. This icon will appear if the user sets a shortcut to your site or adds a bookmark to it. But these don't work so well on mobile devices. So for mobile devices, you can use the Apple Touch icon meta tag. Okay, so we're at the end of the video. By now, you should have a good grasp on what you need to do to accomplish turning an existing MVC website into a mobile-friendly website. jQuery Mobile is an important part of the mobile experience. We didn't even scratch the surface, so I suggest heading over to the jQuery Mobile website and reading up on the documentation. One thing you may want to start with are collapsible containers, and to have a look at theming. Be sure to look at libraries for detecting devices and their capabilities. You don't want to have to do all that work yourself. Always keep in mind the complexity of your solution. Use partial views when possible to reduce duplication. Keep files separate, and don't overload pages with content and functionality for multiple devices. Mobile devices, screens, and capabilities are changing very rapidly. Make sure you keep up to date with what's new so you can deliver the best experience to your users. Feel free to send me any questions, visit my blog, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thanks for watching.